Daniel 8:13 through 27, maybe. We'll see if we get there. It's the Maccabean Wars, the Hasmoneans, the Romans, the Herodians, and our wrap-up. So we'll see if we get that far. I'm going to try and be ambitious tonight and get through this. We have been looking at the Intertestamental Period. We have already discussed the Hellenistic kingdoms for the most part. We got the final 7 years we're going to look at here still, dealing with Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And we discussed the Septuagint, Old Testament Greek, and the Apocrypha, and we read from that. Very fascinating times of persecution of the Jews during this period of time that will lead to what we're going to discuss tonight, which is the revolt of the Jewish people led by Maccabees, which just means the hammer. And we'll discuss the Hasmoneans, the Romans, Herod in his appointment as king of the Jews, in his building of the Second Temple. We will not cover that, but that's critical in spirit. And Herod dies 6 AD. So for the most part, that's when the New Testament takes over during that time of King Herod towards the very end of his reign. That is when Jesus Christ had his first advent, was born, and our salvation began. Okay, so we've read this before. We'll read this again. This is the section that we're discussing, and we'll have the first reader please read 3 of these sentences, and the next person the last 3 verses. So if you would.
And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed excessively great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it was waxed great even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Okay, we've discussed that. That's Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who is the little horn, and the dude is evil. He is a foreshadowing of the Antichrist. Let's read on from 12 through 14. Next reader, please.
And a post was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spoke, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed.
And we will discuss that period as well. So let's roll right into it. Let's talk about this first, this 2,300 days, this reign of evil, verse 8:14. Have you ever heard of the Great Disappointment? Okay, one of the modern churches around this area sprang from that particular point. William Miller interpreted this 2,300 days in this prophecy, Daniel 8:14, and he took the years, the days, and he turned them into years and said, well, 2,300 years from that day, that's when Jesus Christ will return. And he named October the 22nd, 1844. Many of the Millerites believed they sold everything, went on to a mountaintop to await Jesus Christ's return. But they came and went, and Jesus Christ didn't return then. This became known, and you can look this up, as the Great Disappointment. Because that's pretty disappointing, isn't it? You sat there, somebody told you it was going to happen, you sold everything, you went on the side of the hill in the morning, waiting for the sun to come up, and nothing happened. So what happened to those people? Well, some of them left, but other ones became Adventists. And that's where the group, the Seventh-day Adventists, have come from. So they came from somebody's misinterpretation of this scripture. Now, isn't that interesting? Because there's always people willing to tell you what the scripture says. But what does it tell us about a prophet that's wrong? On the Old Testament, it says stone them. Now, for me, I'm not going to hang all of my belief on one dude's interpretation that he's got. No, I know enough about Scripture to know that nobody knows the day or the hour, right? So anyway, we've got to be very careful. But that's where, that's a historical tie to that specific Scripture. And I think that's pretty fascinating. Most scholars align these 2,300 days with the historic reign of terror, or Antioch IV Epiphanes. Again, this foreshadowing of the Antichrist, which ran September the 6th of 171 BC through December 25th of 164 BC, when he was finally taken out, finally died. So there is a historic corollary to those specific days. Again, this was predicted, in like 560 BC, and here it is, 400 years later that this occurs. So it's prophecy fulfilled. Prophecy predicted, prophecy fulfilled by the prophet Daniel. From our previous session, we saw how horrific this period, this 2,300 days was. He was trying to make them convert to his religious beliefs, his way of life, and it was either die or fight. So they had three choices. You completely convert, burn your scriptures, do not circumcise your children, throw away everything that you had been raised to worship God as and who God was, and replace it with whatever he's wanting. Of course, we discussed that there's parallels coming when the Antichrist will make you take the mark of the beast and worship him as God. Now we're going to get to the point where there's going to be a revolt against this last leader of the Seleucid Empire, because many are going to choose to fight. And this lead to the Maccabean Wars, which occur from 167 to 142 BC. Just because Antiochus Epiphanes IV died, the Seleucids still continued to fight and try to take back over this land during this period. Any questions before we continue? So far we're good? Okay, so Jewish independence. Now, there are many Jews that welcomed the Hellenization, and they went over to them when they were faced with pressure. Of course, that was the economic. If you put your life above your spiritual being, you were willing to compromise, and many people compromised. But there was a group of them called the Chazidim. It's over here. I forgot my pointer. But it's over in the corner next to the warrior. Those are the ones that led the group, and those were the Maccabees. In the first book of Maccabees, that Apocrypha, we read that last week, provides us that eyewitness account of the Jewish war against Antiochus IV Epiphanes and the Seleucids. In 167, an aged priest named Matthias, from the family of Hasmonean, refused mandatory Hellenization, and he with his 5 sons led a rebellion. It was really a guerrilla war at first, of them coming out of the mountains, because if you study history, you'll find out a weaker opponent will always go into a guerrilla warfare mode until they've raised enough of an army up and were able to fight them on the battlefield. That's exactly what occurred. There were a number of battles that occurred. You see the chart there of all the battles.
What exactly is the definition of guerrilla warfare?
Guerrilla warfare is a type of warfare in which you're hit and run, because it's hard to defend everything at once. So what they will do is they'll mass their forces, do a sudden strike and a sudden hit against an area, either to destroy something, like kill a number of their warriors, or get stores so they can go and supply themselves, get weapons. So you always hear about these groups that are in small and hit hard and go back. They do not want to have a battle on battle. because they don't have the training, they don't have the equipment, and that's what a guerrilla war is. And it has been throughout history that has occurred. When a weaker opponent that's the tactic they use against a superior power. And over time, it wears and wears and wears out that superior force, especially if it's trying to occupy a land. That's what the Vietnamese did. That was a famous guerrilla war. The Afghanis were doing the same thing. So a weaker side against an extremely superior force, that occurs. So there was a series of battles. They ended up winning a great deal. You can see the ones here. The dark ones are the ones they lost, but they were whipping these guys out. They knew the terrain. These armies would come in and they would surprise them and attack them. So it was a very effective thing. They would destroy pagan altars that were put up. This is what the Maccabees did. They destroyed the pagan altars, those ones to Zeus, that each town had to set up an altar to Zeus and worship them routinely. And they also killed circumcised boys and demanded Jews to join their rebellion. Now, it wasn't a peace-loving thing. These were actually going against those people who had Hellenized before. So they were killing youth too. So don't think they're a bunch of saints. They were fighting for their lives, and their measures were desperate. In 165 BC, Judah, who was one of the sons, and he lived until 160 BC, and he was the one that was called the Hammer. He was the main general at first that was whipping these Seleucid armies that were superior to them, and he succeeded, and he wins a number of major battles. In 164 BC, the temple was liberated, and that's Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and rededicated, and that's where the Festival of Hanukkah comes from. The statement goes that they cleansed the temple, and there was just enough oil in the lamp for it to last during that dedication period that was supposed to be for 8 days. So that's where the miracle of lights come from. It's a little bit of oil lasted during the entire dedication, and that's where that comes from. After Judah died, Jonathan took over as the lead of the army, and he continued to war against the weakened Seleucids. Now, the Seleucids were also being attacked from other fronts, so this was kind of a sideline. In 142 BC, another of the 5 sons, Simon, succeeded, and he appealed to Rome, who acknowledged the Judean independence, and from them, the Hasmonean, because they were, again, from the house of Hasmonean, empire, or I should say, kingdom, was established. Okay, any questions on this? So this is the first time the Jews were able to actually rule their own land since Judah was taken over in 587 BC. So here is the Hasmonean Kings, and again, this is the Judea, and this was the land that they eventually took over. They started in this area, and they expanded and expanded throughout these years. Here's the Hasmonean dynasty, or lineage here. Here's Matthias, came off the last son Simon, had sons, and then this went on down through the lineage, and they eventually dropped off. These were the Jewish people's first independence, like I said, since 587 BC. However, her sovereignty rested on the backs of the Roman power, so the Seleucids never attacked them again. So as the Seleucid Empire weakened, they took over more and more territory, and they grew, expanding their kingdom. The Hasmoneans were from the line of Aaron. So not only were they kings, they were priests as well. So they're priest kings, which is interesting. Things were going well until 66, 65 BC, when 2 brothers that remained, these 2 here, were in dispute over who should succeed. Eventually in 63 BC, Roman co-consul Pompey intervenes with his Roman legions, and thus begins the Roman rule period. So that is how this is transferred from Alexander the Great. All right, it should go back to the Persian Empire, the ram, and then Alexander the goat, and then his kings. The 4 lesser horns came in, and then that's the Seleucids. And then after that, there was a revolt, and the Maccabees took over. But then they relied on Rome for their possessions of power. And the Roman co-consul came in, and he is the one that finally won the victory for one of the brothers, this one here, Aristobulus. And that is how it began, and which will, the Romans will lead to the destruction of Jerusalem and the Jewish diaspora. So the Jews invited him in. Isn't that interesting? And that's why the Romans were there. Now, again, when we were looking over and we saw all the things that were occurring with the Persians, I showed you a little bitty picture of the Roman Empire that was growing over in that region. Here it is right here. The Romans were over in this region. Seleucid Empire was here. The Roman Empire would win a series of victories, and then they would slowly expand towards this area of the Middle East, where Jerusalem was the center of God's universe. So here we are showing the growth of Rome between 300 BC and 44 BC. They had conquered Gaul. Of course, Caesar conquers Gaul. Spain was taken in, and this portion was taken in after the battles with the Punic War against the Carthaginians. They were slowly taken over here. Here's the Macedonian Empire. One of the former generals was here, and he was taken over. In fact, he ceded some of his empire. This particular person, rather than fight in this Lydia region, handed over their empire to the Roman conquerors that were coming. And they were pressing in this region, and they were eventually taking over this entire area of the Seleucids. So they were right on the border. Here's Jerusalem. So Roman was an efficient, bloody, ruthless, militaristic society built upon slavery and the constant inflow of conquered nations and the wealth they took from them. They were an outstanding nation in terms of laws, engineering, and they brought in captured culture. They too, though they did conquer Greece, were influenced heavily by this Hellenistic society yet again. So since 200 BC, Rome's growth was rapid, and they took over all this area. And this spectacular growth of Rome was allowed by God. And again, God allows this to occur, who would later use Rome for his greater purposes. In fact, when we say the creed that we do every Sunday was suffered under Pontius Pilate, the Roman, the governor of this time. So here we have the Roman Jewish subjugation, which occurred from 63 BC to 70 AD. So that is how Rome got in control of this area. And when you see the Bible, it is, the New Testament is so full of Rome. It is the governing body. And that is why they're in that place. We've seen this history. We've seen them come in here. We have seen that God allowed this to occur for his greater purposes. And because of the Roman Empire, after Jesus Christ is crucified, Christianity spreads like wildfire because of the institution that Rome is and the safety it provides for its people if you live under their tyranny. But it spread, and it was nurtured under that Roman structure that was set up. Now, of course, it wasn't the state religion until Constantine had his conversion and made it the state religion, which polluted it altogether. But again, the Christianity spread. But here we have Pompey, and he shows that he's a Hellenist right here. Does that guy look like, a fella that you'd imagine would be a rock star, good-looking kind of fella. You know, if you go back a couple of 300 years before the Hellenes, it'd be an idealized, individual. But here you see him with all his warts, and he doesn't look like someone that would inspire fear. But this guy was a co-ruler along with Julius Caesar, and eventually Julius Caesar ended up having this individual killed, and he took sole rulership at the time. But this man was an excellent general. He received the name of Pompey the Great, and he went into went into Jerusalem to settle this dispute, and he took complete control. He helped Aristobulus win between the Hasmonean Kings, and he actually went and rode his horse into the Temple Mount as part of the victory. Now, he did allow them to reestablish their worship, but it was under their thumb from then on. But by then, all the Hellenistic towns were still allowed to occur because they had not been defeated by the Hasmoneans, and they set up different regions within this area to rule. That is why you have the Greek language spoken, Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin cultures all mixing at this time. That is why when you look, or when it talks about Pontius Pilate putting the name of Jesus Christ on there, is the King of the Jews. He wrote it in 3 languages, right? He wrote it in Greek, he wrote it in Latin, and he wrote it in Hebrew. So one was the language of the people, one was the generic language, and the other one was the ruling language, which was Latin. How did this turn into Herod becoming the king? There were so many disputes with the Hasmoneans that Rome wanted their man in there. Now, Herod the Great grew up with Augustus Caesar. So they were good friends, because he had grown up in Rome. So he put his good friend Herod, who becomes Herod the Great, into that rulership position there to settle the dispute and make it a more settled region, more looking towards Rome. So here are the verses that talks about this 4th kingdom that's coming. And I've had to if someone would please read that, I'd appreciate it. Daniel 2:4. Next reader, please.
2:40.
Yeah, 2:40.
Sorry. And the 4th kingdom shall be as strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise.
Which, if you look at the Roman legion, the most efficient military structure, organization that had ever occurred in the history of mankind was the Roman legion and the fighting nature that it was. And they subdued all things. They weren't through yet. They would continue on and rule much of this land. They would take over Egypt. In fact, this whole area, the Mediterranean Sea, was essentially a Roman lake. And that's what they were trying to do, is they did not want anyone to have any of the land that was on the Mediterranean that they did not control. So that was one of the key things that they did. Daniel 7:7 also speaks of this. Next reader, please.
After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake into pieces, broke into pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns.
So I show a member of the Roman legion over there. Notice he's got this, it's called a plenum right here, this thing right here, a pellum. And then they have this short glacus, which is a stabbing sword. So the way they would fight, you saw those phalanxes before, right? Well, this defeated the phalanxes. And what it was is this huge sword that would protect them from those spears. But they would take that pellet, and you notice the top of it's metal, and the bottom of it's wood. So they would take these things when they got close enough and throw them at them. And when they threw it, the tip would break off, and the piece of wood would be left, so they couldn't pick it up and throw it back at it. So they could throw it once, and they practiced throwing it once and hitting their target, and then they would close in with these shields standing, shoulder to shoulder, and their job would be to take this thing and jab it. It wasn't a slashing sword; it was a jab. So they practiced the thrust, over, and that's what the way they'd come at you. They'd be looking you in the eyes as they killed you. So this was a take no prisoners kind of war that they would bring, and it would be organized in which they would have these rows, 20 people wide, and they would all be staggered behind the other. So one guy would fight until he was tired, and then the whole front was tired, and then they go rotate or something to that, whatever it is in Latin. And the soldiers in the rank would step back, and the next one would come up fresh, and they would have a time to rest, and they would just keep coming at you. And so it was a killing machine, and it was very effective. Okay, any questions on this? And again, does that 70 AD date look familiar? That's when the Jewish nation was destroyed. That's when the Jewish temple was destroyed, that Jesus said, no stone shall stand upon another. It really went far beyond that. But as far as the Jewish nation was concerned, it was wiped out by then. Here's the Herodian Judea, and these names should look familiar to you. This is the time of Jesus Christ and the way the land was divided. Herod the Great ruled over this period of time. He was not really, he was a converted Jew is what he was. He was not Jewish. He was an Edomite. Again, he was appointed by Rome by approval of the Senate. He was a friend of Augustus Caesar. That's why he got the job. They put him in, and they knew he would be subservient to them. And he was. And he was called great for a reason. He was a great builder. And he took the Second Temple and turned it into a world-class wonder of the world during his time. And it was magnificent. And that's the temple that Jesus went in and taught in and went and threw the tables over. So that was the temple that Herod the Great put in place. Upon death, Herod, his kingdom encompassed this whole area. But when he died, Rome actually turned part of it into a province. At the time of his death, until 135 AD, that was all Jewish. So Jerusalem was in the Jewish province. And, most of the Jewish homeland was in that province. There were Jews that were living in other areas as well. This was called the Decapolis because it was 10 Hellenistic cities that were there. And these were the other regions that were given to the sons of Herod. Herod Antipas, of course, you heard of him. That's where Jesus Christ would go ask, Jesus Christ, to perform miracles in the night he was before he was killed. So that's how you ended up with these pieces of land being cut up and under the domination of Rome. Isn't that interesting? To me, that is. That's how. If you ever want to look at how it all got divided, I'll send these out to you, and this is exactly where we went, how we got from the Persian Empire all the way down to Herod's Judean rule. And that is the way that transpired. So, let's, we got plenty of time, so any questions before we move on?
This may be too simple a question, I don't know, but when you refer to like the second temple, is that a specific, is it a temple in Jerusalem?
Yes.
And the rebuilding of the temple?
Yeah. The first temple was created or built by, I should say, the son of David, King Solomon. It's called Solomon's Temple. David's hands, and it's in Jerusalem and it's on Temple Mount. So David's hands had committed too much violence and were bloody, and God said, I will not allow you to build that holy house. And so Solomon was the one that was given the right to build the house of God, the temple of God. So that was the first temple. And that's where it's talked about. That's why Solomon was so rich. He poured a huge amount of money into building that temple. He took the best cedars of Lebanon and took the best engineers. It's a really beautiful write-up. And at the dedication of the temple, I think it's really cool. If you go back and look, it says, Solomon is talking and he goes, you know, this is a magnificent temple, but can any temple hold the presence of God? So that's a pretty cool thought. But at that time, that's where they put the Ark of the Covenant. So the Ark of the Covenant was in there, and that's where the Holy of Holies is, and the only ones that could go by back in there was a priest. And so it's a fascinating time. I've got a book I'll share with you if you'd like to see it on the various temples. Now that was the first temple. That first temple was destroyed by, along with the kingdom of Judea, along with Jerusalem as a capital, when Nebuchadnezzar came and he finally destroyed it in 587 BC, leveled it to the ground. Previous to that, he had taken the vessels. If you remember that, those vessels were taken at the time of Daniel, when he was first taken with the first part of the Babylonian captivity Jews. They were taken, and when he did, he took those and put those in the temple of his God. And then we see that Belshazzar, the third son, the third ruler, the grandson, he took those, and that's where you have Daniel 5. Remember that? He drank from those holy vessels, and then God ended it for him that night with the writing on the wall that says, many, many to call parson, which says, you know, you have been weighed and your time is over. So those same vessels were available when the Babylonian captivity ended after 7 years, and they moved back. So they were able to take that under Cyrus the Great. He decreed that they could go back and start rebuilding the temple. That's the second temple. That was done under the rule of Zerubbabel. And Zerubbabel temple lasted from when they were, and we'll talk about that when we get into Daniel 9. The decree to go and rebuild the wall around Jerusalem starts a timetable for us, but that's the epic of them rebuilding that temple, and it's all in the Bible, so that period's there. But then you have this intertestamental period, and the temple's not what it once was, because they built it back as best they could, and they taxed the people, but it wasn't as magnificent as what Herod did to it. They said that looking at the temple on the hill from afar off, and you got to understand, these people are living in, rock mud huts. This thing is all marble. It is white. It is glistening. It is shining on the horizon, and it is just magnificent, according to all accounts. And that is Herod's temple, which is really a refurb of the second temple, Zerubbabel's temple. Now that is completely destroyed in 70 AD. But we know, because we're going to study in chapter 9, that there's going to be a third temple that will be rebuilt. That's where the Antichrist is going to declare himself God. Any other questions? Does that answer that?
Yes. I had a basic framework, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I've given a class on that one before, and I'm happy to go back and cover that if you'd like. Because it's important. Again, the temple is important. It is the center of Jewish life. That's why when the Jews did the diaspora over the Jews across the entire world, they would say to each other next year in Jerusalem, because they knew that they were away from home. They wanted to go back to the center of God's universe, Jerusalem. and they wanted to worship God. They would have synagogues that they would worship at, the Jews would, but there was only one temple, and that temple could only be in one place, and that one place is on Temple Mount in Jerusalem. That's why they've never built another temple, and they're waiting for their time, because they know that their Messiah is going to come in a temple or be worshipped in that temple in what we call the millennial kingdom. So,
You know, it's amazing, Joe. We've been studying all along in the Bible study that Jerusalem is the apple of God's eye. That is the center of the universe for God, right? We've been studying that, and it is amazing that you're looking at, what, 2,500 years since the first temple was built, right? Is that about right?
But, well, it's depending upon where you want to put the reign of David, it's about that's about 3,000 years, about 1,000-ish BC is when that temple was first built.
So that's
3,000 years.
So for 3,000 years, that has not changed.
No.
And the only way that has not changed is because God makes it that way.
He's
because
allowed it.
mankind would have built that temple in other places and whatnot if it was left to mankind. But God is making that happen. He is making that be the center.
Yeah, and it is for the Jewish people. And they will not accept another temple besides right there. I was in an interesting conversation with a Mormon one time, and I was talking to him about, the second coming and the temple and that sort of thing. He goes, well, we just dedicated our, had 3,000th temple, over there. And I'm like, what? I didn't know he was Mormon until then. Because they have temples everywhere where the Latter-day Saints are at, and that's what they call them. So, interesting. Any other questions and thoughts? Okay. Let's move on, and we're going to just do Scripture and discuss Scripture for the remainder, because we have got all this background that we've been doing for weeks and weeks, and after doing the background, we should be able to read this and say, oh yeah, that's what that is. So let's go ahead and have somebody read, someone read 15 and 16, please.
Then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. Okay,
so there stood before me as the appearance of a man. So he wasn't a man, but he had the appearance of a man. Who do you think this is? Now look at, Gabriel is, whoever this man is telling Gabriel what to do.
And really only one man can do that.
Yeah, well, the appearance of a man. So, I think this is what they call a theophany. This is Jesus Christ appearing. Again, Daniel is his beloved prophet of the Old Testament, in which he entrusts so much of this prophecy to. He is showing up and giving these instructions. And of course, we discussed the bank of that Ulan River, which is run by Susa, and that's where he's at, Daniel. And then we have Gabriel. Now, Gabriel's only going to appear to two people in the Bible. Twice he's going to appear to Daniel, because he also appeared with it before. Yeah, and then where else does he appear to?
In Revelation.
Well, Gabriel, another time, he's a messenger God, and the messenger angel who sees Mary. Yeah. Gabriel goes and gives this message, that rings throughout the ages to Mary. So that just shows the importance of this interface that he is having with the prophet Daniel here. And he's going to tell him what this vision is. So let's read 17 and 18, please.
So he came near where I stood, and when he came, Understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and stood me upright.
Okay, so there's that Son of Man again, and notice this is not a capital S. In the verse or chapter 7, it talked about the Son of Man shall come. So that's the one that Jesus Christ claims that title, Son of Man. He uses the Son of Man title for himself more than any other. And but here Daniel is being called Son of Man, and that's a small s. So he is being, that's a gracious title that he has been given because he is representing all man there for at that time of the end be the vision. So this is going to happen at the end of something. So does that mean that it's the end times, or does that mean it's the end of his people at this time? It's kind of interesting to see that, because again, they're talking about the Israelis. So this is an end to a period for these people, because we shall see that's exactly how this is going to end up. Verses 18 and 19, please.
19 and 20.
Or 19 and 20, please.
And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed the end shall be. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media, is that right?
That's fine, yeah.
And Persia.
You were speaking with the, Persian accent there, so yeah. Is it, they always show, these people, it always kills me, they'll pronounce something as if they really know how it's pronounced by the people that lived 2,500 years ago. Some of these, they don't know. Give me a break. They don't know how those people spoke. But anyway, I've always heard it, media in Persia, but is that what it is? I'm not certain. I don't speak that language. So we already know this well. We know who Media Persia is. We've covered that. There's no question. It's just confirmed right here. There's no doubt. So let's read 21 and 22, please.
The rough goat is the king of Persia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power.
Pretty clear right there, isn't it? There's no mystery. Gabriel clears it all up. It's the rough goat is the king of Greece, who is Alexander the Great, is representing the Grecian people, the Hellenes, and the great horn between the eyes is the first king, and he is the first real king of this empire that shall spread all the way from Greece to the Indian subcontinent. So this massive horn is that first king. And we saw it's going to be broken, and there's four more horns that will represent four kingdoms that are come out of these nations, but not in his power. So in other words, they're saying Alexander the Great's not going to give them that power. They're going to have to fight for it. Okay. Any questions? I mean, this should be fairly clear, right? No questions?
Can you explain it?
Yeah. Well, the problem is keeping the horns and the kings straight with which one. We know who the kings were as we go along, but as back in verse 9, we talked about Alexander the Great being killed. So we have to understand that Gabriel is explaining
right
what's going on and who the players are.
Yeah, and when we look at this, Daniel doesn't know who Grecia is. He doesn't know who Media and Persia are. He knows those empires are over there, so he's heard those names. Grecia, he's probably heard that name, but he's probably saying, how could this be? Here I was under Nebuchadnezzar, and it got taken away from me. And he is still hearing this under the Babylonian rule. He is still working for the Babylonian kingdom, and that's going to be overthrown. And they're going to, not only is it going to be overthrown by the Median Persians, they're going to be overthrown too by Greece. And then that's going to be overthrown by 4 kingdoms. So he's probably spinning at this point.
Yeah.
In fact, he is. He has a reaction that I see, I think, from some of you after we go through this. He looks kind of like he's ill a little bit. Yeah. Oh, really? Because he's going to have that reaction at the end here. All right, so this is a continuation. It's just on a different page. So we have 4 kingdoms shall stand up, and then we continue on. Someone read 23 and 24.
And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper in practice and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people.
All right, so this points back to the last sentence where it says here, and in the latter time of their kingdom. What kingdom? The 4 kingdoms. So out of one of these 4 kingdoms, and the latter time of their kingdom, those 4, when the transgressors are come to full. And what's a transgressor?
Trespass.
Trespasser, a sinner. Forgive our trespasses. A transgression is a sin. So when the sin has come to full being, and that's exactly what Antiochus IV Epiphanes, his name itself, he chose the name Epiphanes. He was really, Antiochus IV. He added on the Epiphanes. The Epiphanes means God with you, or I am God with you. So Antiochus IV Epiphanes saying, I'm the king and I'm God with you. Boy, that's pretty, it's kind of like Emmanuel, God with us. He's with us. And that's the arrogance. So when you see all these horrendous things that he did that we discussed when we read Maccabees out of the Apocrypha, that first chapter, his sin is complete. It doesn't get any worse than what he's doing to people. He's killing them if they don't convert. He's making them worship. He's destroying the Word of God. He is destroying everything in the temple to worship. He stole all the vestments and everything. The worship objects, all were taken out, all melted down and used for his purposes. So this guy is a transgressor to the max. It has come to the full. So you had a line of these Seleucid kings that were ruling, and I showed you that whole list of rulers, and he's the end of the line. He is the end of the line. When it has come to full, all this will happen, and that's exactly what happened. He's a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark senses, and he shall stand up. And that's exactly who Antiochus Epiphanes IV is. And his power shall be mighty, but not of his own power. So where's he getting his power from?
Satan.
I would say Satan. To do this, whenever anyone is out to totally destroy the Jewish people, they're not working on their own. It's an irrational thought. Just like Adolf Hitler. He hated the Jews. I mean, it was beyond rational thought why he would do that. It's a satanic influence. So this man is going to be influenced by Satan, just like who?
Antichrist.
The Antichrist. Now you see here I have it, all these dark or bolded, all this is in bold. Many scholars say that all this pertains to the Antichrist as well. And, if you look at Scripture, there's dual fulfillments that do occur. So, is this going to speak to the Antichrist? I think it will, but it definitely also speaks to Antiochus IV Epiphanes. So, when you talk to some people, they say, oh, that prophecy is fulfilled. Yes, it was fulfilled at that time, but that does not mean that those same sentences could be used for another person in the future. You look at Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. That's them right here too.
It's a foreshadowing.
Yeah, it is a foreshadowing, in my opinion. And many other scholars see the same thing. So let's read next, 25 and through 26.
And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. And he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand.
Okay, so his policy shall also cause craft. Many people see that witchcraft, or he will also prosper monetarily. There's a number of things that you can read into that. But he's going to prosper for a little while. And he shall magnify himself in his heart. Again, this guy thinks he's God. You'll see, Satan uses these tools throughout history to come and fulfill this role. And they think they're something. Caesar thought he was God. Not Caesar, Augustus Caesar thought he was God. There's a number of emperors things that think they're gods. You've heard me say God King. When some of these people come into power, they consider themselves gods and kings over their people. And that's exactly what the Antichrist is going to be. He's going to be a king over all the nations, but he is going to demand himself to be worshipped as God. It's right out of the scripture. He's a God king. This man here was a God king. And
Antichrist goes in the temple and claims it.
yes. Well,
he just comes out and says it.
Yep. Well, if you look at Adolf Hitler, I think that's interesting. The school children would pledge allegiance to Adolf Hitler. If you were in the army, you pledged allegiance to Adolf Hitler. You didn't pledge allegiance to Germany. You pledged allegiance to the man. Tell me that is not a godlike kind of status that you're giving to people. And when you go to North Korea and look at Kim Jong-un, he's their God king. He demands them essentially worship him. They don't have gods there that they worship. They have him. He's the state. You don't need anybody else but the state to worship. So, again, that's the kind of evil thing we're talking about here. And by peace shall destroy many. Have you ever heard the term we're going to pacify that nation? Well, that essentially means you're going to take them over and you're going to impose your peace on it. Like Pax Romana. Have you heard of that? The Roman peace, Pax Romana. Well, they had Pax Romana because they had beat the heck out of everyone else, and everyone was subjected and under their rule. So once you admitted that you were under Roman rule, you had your peace. Until then, you were going to be conquered and enslaved until you acknowledged them as the ruler. Now, the Romans did not usually demand that you worship their gods. They allowed you to worship other gods. And they were doing the slow, gradual control of the people. But the Pax Romana is war. So when this guy says, by peace shall destroy many, yeah. Have you ever heard of peacekeeping operations? Yeah, it's a war by any other name. Shall also stand up against the Prince of Princes. Who's that? Yeah, Jesus Christ. So he's going to declare himself God. He is going to have a war against God himself, or what the Jews consider God, which is, we're studying all the names of God, the Jehovah God, but he shall be broken without hand. Now, what does that mean? Broken without hands. Broken not physically. He is going to be destroyed, and God's going to see to it that his time ends when it needs to end. So God will be involved in making sure the evil in this man is ended. And that's where you get that 2,300 days. God knew exactly how long that guy would be allowed to reign, and he knew when he would be terminated. Same way with the Antichrist. When the Antichrist comes, there's a 7-year tribulation period at the end of which it's over. It's over for the Antichrist. Okay. So, where do we end up with? Did we
You
do?
had to read
Last
26.
Okay, someone read 20, next reader read 26 and 27.
And the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. Wherefore, shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted, and was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up and did the king's business. And I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it.
Yeah, and you can understand why. None understood it. They didn't have a historical context to place it in. We do. Just as we've been laying out the history that occurred, the prophecy that was fulfilled. Now, reading this vision of the evening and the morning, which was told as true, to me, that shows days. That gives you a time that we're discussing the day. I don't see how you could take that 2,300 days and turn it into years because of this. Because it discusses a complete day, a complete cycle, and it's true. Therefore, shut up the vision because it's not going to happen for many days. You're just not going to be able to understand it. Now, we're going to read in chapter 12 of Daniel where it says the vision will also be shut up and it will be not understood until the end times. So, again, you have to have context in which to understand these things because they're so complex and they're so far future. I mean, James tells us we're here but a wisp, but a moment. And we are. I mean, heck, I'm 60 years old and I've just seen a glimpse of history in my days. We're talking thousands of years that are covered in some of these prophecies as we go through Daniel. And they're still being fulfilled today, and they're still unfolding many of those prophecies. You know, Daniel chapter 2 specifically is going to go on and on. And I, Daniel, fainted, no doubt. I mean, that's a lot to take in, and was sick certain days. Do you think he's physically sick, or he just mentally just worn out? I mean, sometimes your brain gets overloaded and just needs to rest, doesn't it? I think that's the point where he's at. His brain's overloaded so much that it's having a response to him physically. And then he rose up and did the king's business. So again, he's still working for the kings of Babylon at this time. Of course, you got Nebuchadnezzar, Nabonius, and then Belshazzar is the third king, and that's when this occurred. And I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. You wonder if he even talked to anybody about it. When you have something this fantastic, do you really share it? Does anyone really relate to it? Do they think you're off your rockers? People would come to this class and think we're all off our rockers. We have concluded Daniel chapter 8.